Welcome back to Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. Yes, we're going to go to live question period in a few moments. Well, a few minutes. The members are reading their delightful statements right now, and I know sometimes, occasionally, they're worth listening to. Most times, well, it's just between the MP and their constituents. So we won't uh, we won't go there too soon. I got a couple things I want to share with you this morning because incredibly, I don't know how I missed this yesterday, but I certainly didn't this morning, and put an article out on this. This is my article in the Post Millennial. I wish that had been my headline. That's not the one I submitted, but it's better than the one I submitted. Justin Trudeau suggests democratically elected right-wing politicians in EU elections, that's European Union elections, are a threat to democracy. That's just one of the ironies, if you will, or the hypocrisies of what Justin Trudeau said about the EU elections. And of course, he dragged out the usual nonsense about populism being this grave danger to democracy, even though populism is democracy. And how can you say it's a threat to democracy when these people were elected democratically? But we'll get into his statement, actually, because I talked about this quite a bit yesterday and how these European Union elections were a complete repudiation of three things: globalism, the war in Ukraine, stop funding the war in Ukraine, stop sending billions, and climate change. Stop the climate change hysteria. The Green Party got demolished all over Europe in these elections. And Marine Le Pen's party in France, which is not exactly far right, it's conservative populist, it's anti mass immigration, it's anti climate change hysteria, it's anti-war in Ukraine. Let's stop the war before everybody dies. That's what we had to do in the First World War. Everybody was just about dead on both sides. And had things kept it going, the United States would have probably been in the same position because it was a war without end. And this is what's happening in Ukraine. So let's listen to what Justin Trudeau had to say about the EU elections. Typical hypocrisy.
We have seen around the world a rise of populist right-wing forces in just about every democracy that we've seen. And it is of concern to see political parties choosing to instrumentalize anger, fear, division, anxiety. My approach has always been to respond to it, to understand it, and to look to solve it, to roll up our sleeves, work hard, and with ambition for this country and for our future. And I continue to be convinced that Canadians are thoughtful about the challenges we're facing and ready to see them solved, rather than just allow themselves to be have their anger amplified without any solutions offered.
My approach has always been, what has your approach always been? To roll up your sleeves, he says, and to get on and understand people? No, your approach, Justin Trudeau, is to call the police when people disagree with you, to have heads crushed, to have people thrown in prison, and then to go over to Europe and say how dangerous it is that the European Union is electing these whole populists. Even though it's democratic, it's not democratic because it's anti-democratic. He doesn't know what he's talking about or what he's even mean. And Justin Trudeau's approach is to be authoritarian and not democratic. Justin Trudeau's approach is not to try to understand his political opponents. Justin Trudeau's approach is to tar his political opponents as misogynist, as racist, sometimes even Nazis. Justin Trudeau's approach is to demonize his political opponents as people not even worthy of rational thought discussion, of not even worthy of his thoughts, because these people are just beyond the pale. Justin Trudeau's approach is to suggest that if you're not on his side, you don't matter at all. And to hell with you, we'll find a jail cell for you. That's Justin Trudeau's approach. And he has the gall to tell reporters yesterday that he's so concerned that people are electing people he doesn't like or he doesn't agree with. This is not democratic, he says, even though it's a democratic election. And this is just not right because these people aren't interested in actually dealing with problems. Well, maybe they're not interested in dealing with problems the way Justin Trudeau deals with them, which is to incarcerate people and to bring down the full force of the state against you, or to call you names, or to take away your free speech with the Online Harms Act. But maybe they have a better idea. At the same time, Justin Trudeau is going on about this horrible occurrence in Europe. Deputy Prime Minister and / Finance Minister Chystia Freeland is going on about what? What do you think she's going on about? Oh, how Pierre Poilievre's Canada is going to be a catastrophe. And it's just not going to have the same kind of freedom and opportunity as Justin Trudeau's Canada. I'm sorry. What freedom is that? What opportunity is that? And of course, the reference here is this crazy capital gains tax, which is on properties of $250,000, which I'm sorry, that's the average price of a cottage these days. This isn't a tax on the super rich. Justin Trudeau's the super rich, and I'd like to know how much he's paying in taxes. Let's listen to Chystia wax eloquent about Justin Trudeau's Canada.
But I would also like to ask Canada's 1%. In fact, Canada's 0.13% to consider this. What kind of a Canada do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a country where kids go to school hungry? Do you want to live in a country where a teenage girl gets pregnant just because she doesn't have the money to buy birth control? Do you want to live in a country where the only young Canadians who can...
I'm sorry, I have to stop her here. So unless the state coughs up for everybody's birth control pills, everybody's going to be unwanted. Every teenage girl is going to have unwanted pregnancies. Isn't there some other way around this? I'm sorry, but
buy their own homes are those with parents who can help with the down payment. Do you want to live in a country?
We live in a country right now where nobody can afford to buy their own home because of interest rates and because the price of a home is skyrocketed to $300,000 and more.
Where we make the investments we need in healthcare, in housing, in old age pensions, but we lack the political will to pay for them and choose instead to pass a ballooning debt onto our children. Do you want to live in a country?
Ballooning debt? You are the finance minister passing a ballooning debt onto our children. You spend twice as much as we take in. You're the one with the $50 billion budget deficit from the last budget alone.
Where those at the very top live lives of luxury, but must do so.
I can't help myself. I've got to stop her again. The ones at the very top lead a life of luxury? Who is she talking about? The politicians who are exempt from every rule and every law. Justin Trudeau, who lives like he has no one to answer to.
In gated communities, behind ever higher fences, using private health care and airplanes, because the public sphere is so degraded and the wrath of the vast majority of their less privileged compatriots burns so hot. Every Canadian across our great country needs to ask themselves these same questions, because the stakes could not be higher.
So who's flying around in jets? Private jets? Justin Trudeau. Who's living in isolation? Justin Trudeau. Clearly, Chystia Freeland is describing Justin Trudeau's Canada not the alternative that we hope Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre might be able to create if he wins the next election. Because whatever he's talking about is completely contrary to the Justin Trudeau Canada we live in right now, where we can't afford a home, we can't afford to even feed ourselves anymore. We are obsessed over gender ideology and sexuality. We are obsessed over climate change, and we don't even think about the things that matter anymore. So I think this demonstrates again that Chystia Freeland is a delusional hypocrite in the same way Justin Trudeau is a delusional hypocrite. They're both together 2 bricks short of a load, which is what the thumbnail is talking about today. Just making sure question period hasn't started yet. But that is, of course, the Canada we have. And there seems to be something serendipitous, almost profound, in having Chystia Freeland as Justin Trudeau's deputy. Because the two of them are both hypocritical and delusional. They both believe, I think very strongly, that they're doing so much for Canadians by giving you what you don't want or need, by taking your money away and giving it back to you in other forms, but never quite enough and never in equal amounts. About lying to you about the state of the country, about saying Canada's in the best state of all G7 countries, and when we're actually last. About telling you that people are coming to Canada to invest money when actually they're leaving the country in droves to get away from the high taxes and the lack of opportunity in Canada. Both of them are completely delusional and both completely hypocritical. Thought you would enjoy that before we get into question period this morning, which will be on momentarily. Let's have some fun. Did you believe that yesterday? How long? 45 minutes to get the sound system going again, the translation system? I'm just glad Melissa Lansman finally, after 3 or 4 attempts, got the question about the spying, which is still the question we need answered. Who are these MPs? So let's hope we get some questions about that. We're not going to get any answers, but we got to keep the pressure on, because if every MP is implicated, if we have no names, that means every MP in the House is potentially guilty. So the pressure should mount on the Trudeau government to release the names, because there are some MPs who are innocent. The vast majority did not, apparently. Some reports say there were 11 or 12. So I'm basing that on that report. I'm basing what I'm saying on that report. I'm saying the vast majority probably aren't working for foreign governments. But apparently there are at least 10 or 12 who are, and we need to know their names. And I would think if I was an MP, I would want their names known so everybody didn't think I was the one spying for China. Where is common sense today with governments, with MPs? We need to put pressure on this government, and I hope the MPs do it themselves, because that might be the reason they need to use. Let's go to question period.
Mr. Speaker, on a cool September day in 1993, my very apolitical grandfather took me excitedly to a campaign office. As we approached the office, he said, "Remember this day. You're helping elect a woman who will show Canada the value that refugees can bring." And
so we should be on very shortly here.
That campaign office belonged to Mobina Jaffer. While she wouldn't win that election, she would eventually be named to the other place, where she would take her rightful place as a trailblazer in Parliament. Mobina Jaffer has been a champion for women.
Would anybody want to brag about their
for human rights? A proud African, a proud Ismaili
I know somebody
Muslim,
in the Senate.
a proud mother, daughter, grandmother, wife, and proud Canadian. Senator Jaffer's time in the other place has been all about improving the quality of life of others, always with humility and good humor. As her time in the other place comes to an end and she returns home to her beloved BC, we express our gratitude to her husband Nurullah and her children and family for sharing her with Canada. Thank you for your wisdom, your kindness that you have shown to me.
Another so Liberal others. Senator retiring to be replaced by another Liberal senator.
Day, the value that refugees bring, what Ismailis and all of us can do, is what you have exemplified every single day of this remarkable career. Thank you.
Oh, let's all applaud for the senator. Unelected senator. Probably feathered her nest quite well.
Dear colleagues, before we begin oral questions, I'd like to remind you the importance, please, of ensuring your earpiece is either on your ear or in your desk.
There goes the
Before we
SOB
start
lecturing the
questions, I
MPs
just
again.
want to re-emphasize the importance of making sure that your earphones are either on your ears or in your desks so that we can make sure to provide the safest environment
Can you
for our
believe
visitors.
this guy? He's always providing, dispensing advice.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. 9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised that he would spend without control, but there would be a rich man somewhere who would pay, and not the middle class. 9 years later, what is the reality? 9 out of 10 members of the middle class are paying more in taxes. The wealthiest have doubled their wealth, their net wealth, according to a video put out by the Prime Minister a few days ago. And the majority of middle-class youth cannot even buy a home. Given that he has already broken that promise, why should we believe him now? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our 2024 budget is based on creating generational fairness. Part of that is asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more when they sell investments, very profitable investments. And it's with that we will invest in more housing for youth, more dental care for seniors, more spots in childcare for young families. We are there to help those who need it. The Conservative Party has just announced that they will side with the wealthiest. They won't be there to help the middle class and those working hard to join it.
They aren't the wealthiest. They are the middle class.
Opposition. That is exactly what he said 9 years ago. And the result, according to his own data published on his Twitter since his arrival in power, the wealth of the wealthiest has doubled as taxes on the middle class and the cost of housing have also doubled. Mr. Speaker, why is it that every time he promises to increase taxes on the wealthiest, it's the poor and the middle class who foot the bill?
The very
Right
rich
Honourable Prime
are people like
Minister,
Justin
Mr.
Trudeau.
Speaker, the same types of justifications the Conservative Party gave in 2015 when they voted against increasing taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. It's the same type of argument they used to vote against the Canada Child Benefit that lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And today, they are in the same situation, defending advantages for the wealthiest in this country, while we are asking for a little more to help with housing for young people, helping seniors with dental care, and many other things, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
9 years ago, the Prime Minister promised he could spend uncontrollably and there'd be a rich guy on a hill somewhere who would pay the bill. The middle class wouldn't have to pay. Well, what is the result? According to him, the total net worth of the richest Canadians has doubled since he took office. Meanwhile, 9 in 10 middle-class Canadians are paying more tax. Housing costs have doubled, so 76% of middle-class youth believe they'll never afford a home. 2 million people line up at a food bank because they can't afford to eat on a middle-class salary. Given that he already broke this exact same promise over 9 years, why should we believe him this time?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if it didn't have real-world impacts on Canadians, it would almost be amusing to watch the Conservative leader tie himself in knots to try and justify voting in favor of advantages for the wealthy Canadians when they sell really profitable investments. We're asking them to pay a little bit more so we can invest more in housing for young people to be able to have the same kinds of opportunities previous generations did. We're delivering dental care for over 200,000 seniors in just the last 6 weeks. We're delivering more spaces in childcare. We're stepping up for Canadians. They're stepping up for the rich.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Real world impacts. That's what we have today after 9 years of this Prime Minister promising to tax, borrow, and spend us into fairness. But according to the StatsCan data he put out himself since he became Prime Minister, the net worth of the wealthiest Canadians has doubled. Why? Because the taxes he puts always land on the middle class. 9 in 10 middle class people are paying higher taxes. The vast majority of Canadians, and 100% of middle class, are paying higher carbon tax. And his last round of small business tax hikes hit plumbers and electricians, not the rich. Why is it that every time he mentions the middle class, they get poor?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our price on pollution delivers more money to 8 out of 10 Canadians right across the country with the Canada Carbon Rebate. And today, Mr. Speaker, there's an opportunity for everyone in this House to stand up and ask the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more when they sell extremely profitable investments. We are doing that on this side of the House. The Conservatives will be protecting the advantage that is there for the wealthiest Canadians, while we invest more in housing, while we invest more in dental care, while we invest more in Canadians who need it.
His nose is getting longer every day.
Speaker, if you are a small business owner, you have even $1 of investment gain, you pay this higher tax that the Prime Minister is promising, because there's no exemption inside the 300,000 small businesses. And it's incredible that during a housing shortage, he wants to tax home builders. During a healthcare shortage, he wants to tax away our doctors. During a food price crisis, he wants to tax our farmers. And while our economy is shrinking more than any other economy in the G7, he wants to tax our small business job creators. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the definition of insanity?
It is the definition of insanity.
For 8 weeks since we put our budget forward, the Conservatives have been incredibly careful not to say a thing about the capital gains rate that we're raising. They didn't want to talk about it for 2 full months, and today, when they are choosing to vote with the wealthiest Canadians and against young Canadians who need more housing, young Canadians who need a better break, seniors who need dental care, they're all trying to spin it in 9 different ways. The reality is they have an opportunity to vote with middle-class Canadians, and they're choosing to vote against them.
What a joke you are. What a hypocrite. Justin Trudeau has no right
The Honourable
to my
Member for
property.
Bellevue-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't have the habit of listening or reading to what the RCMP suggests, but the RCMP is saying it doesn't have the tools to counter a threat to security, to social peace, the threat of hate speech. It doesn't have the tools to do
Oh,
its work.
get off it.
Obviously, the religious defense in the criminal code that allows people to say and incite violence is a precious tool for those who want to sow violence. Does the Prime Minister agree to repeal the religious exemption
How
from the
dare
criminal
this
code?
blockhead stand up
The Right
and
Honourable
want to
Prime
take my
Minister,
freedom of speech
Mr.
away?
Speaker,
He doesn't even
hate speech
live in this
and
country.
anti-Semitism have no place in Canada. Our government fights racism and hatred like no government has done in the past, introducing an act on online harms, funding increased protection for mosques, synagogues, and places of worship, and our plan to criminalize the Holocaust denial. We recognize there is more to do. We will continue to work with our police services with the necessary laws to strengthen protection for all in this country.
Did he just say he's going to criminalize Holocaust denial?
The Honourable Member for Bellevue-Chambly. How to waste 35 precious seconds. Mr. Speaker,
You're
the
wasting
streets of
a
Montreal
lifetime.
and other cities in Quebec and Canada are subject to protests and open invitations to hatred when it is not, frankly, to violence. There are even calls to exterminate the people of Israel. What does it take for the Prime Minister to protect the people he is responsible for?
Take our freedom
The
of
Right
speech. He's
Honourable
already
Prime
doing
Minister.
that, blockhead.
Mr. Speaker,
Don't worry.
for years we've been investing to create more protection for mosques and synagogues and places of worship and community centers. We will continue to
How about
work
churches? Are there any
with
churches
police
left in your
forces
little world,
across the
Justin?
country to protect people and highlight that it's important for all Canadians
What a
to
moron.
remember our values of respect, openness, tolerance, and acceptance. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there to, yes, allow people to protest within the law and within peace, but also be there to fight hate speech and calls for violence.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
Yesterday, the Liberals finally woke up. They realized that it's unfair for nurses and carpenters to pay more taxes than billionaires. Well, clearly they didn't have a problem with that for the past 8 years. So why did the Prime Minister let carpenters and nurses pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets in a row?
Looks like the spy scandal's all over, folks. Not a single question about it now. You think the parties are colluding to bury this story?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Sure looks like it to me.
One of the very first things we did in 2015 was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class. I will recall that the NDP at that time actually voted against that measure. But right now, we're putting forward a measure to ask the wealthiest Canadians who make a tremendous amount of profits when they sell extremely profitable investments to actually pay a little bit more on those profits.
How dare you suggest I can't invest money and get a return on it? You're a bloody communist.
Things to create fairness for every generation. The Conservatives are choosing to vote against that, and they're standing once again with the wealthiest.
If they were standing with the wealthiest, they'd be standing with you, you twit.
This 8 years ago.
What a twerp.
Yesterday, the Liberals woke up. They realized that it wasn't fair for nurses to pay more tax than billionaires, but they didn't think it was unfair over the past 8 years. Why has the Prime Minister forced nurses to pay more taxes than billionaires for 8 straight budgets? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, we increased taxes for the wealthiest 1%, and we decreased them for the middle class. And since then, at that time, the NDP voted against those measures. We are fighting for the middle class and those working hard to join it. That is why we are asking
fighting
the
for anything
wealthiest
except yourself.
who make huge profits by selling their investments to pay a little more so that we can deliver on housing, deliver on dental care, deliver more childcare spaces for Canadians who need them. Unfortunately, once again, the Conservatives are siding with the wealthiest against middle-class Canadians.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
The finance minister is about to impose another job-killing, wage-cutting, price-hiking tax on Canadians, and she wants us to believe the latest fairy tale that somehow we'll all be better off if the Prime Minister just raises taxes again. We've heard this for 9 years. Let's take a look at the result. Canada is on track for the worst decline in living standards in 4 decades. 9 out of 10 middle-class families now pay more in income taxes, and Stats Canada says that Liberal policies since 2015 have cost Canadians $4,200 in lost wages per worker. They've made the middle class worse off with their last 8 budgets. Why should anyone believe that the 9th time is the charm?
It's a completely irrational tax. Oh, Mr. Speaker.
For the past 8 weeks, we have watched the unedifying spectacle of the Conservatives squiggling and squirming, deflecting and evading. But today they have no choice. Today they had to pick a side. And we're seeing now the side that they have chosen.
Well, of course, it's the only side to pick. What a moron.
They think a nurse or a plumber should pay tax at a higher rate than a multimillionaire. Canadians are watching. Canadians now see whose side the Conservatives.
It's nurses and plumbers who have the properties for $250,000, you idiot.
For 9 years, Canadians have suffered from the terrible consequences of Liberal economic policies. And now, what are they doing? For young Canadians struggling to be able to afford to buy their first home, they're raising taxes on home builders. For families barely able to afford groceries and lined up at food banks, they're raising taxes on the farmers who produce the food. And for thousands thousands of Canadians who have gone years without having a family doctor. They're chasing even more doctors away with a new tax on medical professions. How is any of that fair?
The Deputy Prime Minister and the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have been trying so hard to fake it. They have been trying so hard to pretend they actually care about working Canadians. But today, there's a vote coming, and they have had to finally pick a side. Today, every single member of this House is going to have to choose. Are you on the side of a nurse, a plumber, a teacher? Or are you on the side of a multimillionaire? And the Conservatives are very clear. They're against fairness. They're in favor of the wealthy lobbyists who advise them.
What a joke.
The Honourable Member from
Those wealthy
Thornhill.
lobbyists are the ones
Canadians are
keeping you
finding
in
that the
power.
harder that they work, the more they are punished. The incompetent finance minister wants people to believe that her job-killing taxes impacts only the very rich. It's doctors, it's farmers, it's small business owners, it's a restaurant that's been in the community and leases its building, it's tradespeople like plumbers and roofers who reinvest in their businesses and their equipment and eventually want to stop working. She's raising their taxes in the name of fairness because she spent all the money that she already took for them. How is any of that fair?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because
The
it's
Honourable
total
Deputy
funk
Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
with these.
Mr. Speaker, one thing that is kind of astonishing is that after having been mute, or you might want to say gagged, for 8 weeks, the Conservatives have finally found some passion around this issue. And isn't it astonishing that when given an actual opportunity to choose to side with a plumber, to choose to side with a nurse, or to side with their multi-millionaire lobbyist pals,
Keep up the talking points.
are choosing to vote against fairness. Canadians are watching.
They know this capital gains tax is a disaster, another catastrophe.
Answer again proves that the minister does not read her own briefing notes. When a small business owner retires and sells their assets, the minister wants to take a bigger piece of that because she couldn't control her own spending. Those are the people that the Liberals call rich. They're people like my own father. If he was alive today, he'd be left high and dry in his retirement years, the years where he needed those earnings the most. He started as a taxi driver in this country and went on to invest in a small business year after year in a personal corp because he didn't have a pension. How is any of that fair?
Exactly. They've got their bloated MP pension, and they want to take away your capital gains. These people are just swine.
Mr. Speaker, squiggle and squirm as you might, it is really hard to put lipstick on a pig. And that is exactly what the Conservatives are trying to do.
Very good analogy.
Today.
There's the pig right now.
Conservatives have found themselves unable when it really counted to side with working people. They have been unable to vote for fairness, to vote for the nurse, to vote for the plumber, and now they're evading responsibility for that choice. But we won't let them. We're in favor of fairness, and they are not.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Forest
What a
Lawn.
joke.
Fast and Furious finance minister unveiled her latest job-killing scheme to screw over Canada's middle class to bankroll her incompetency. Newcomers like my family came here for the Canadian dream, had very little, worked hard, saved money, and started a small business. She calls them tax cheats and vilifies their success. This job-killing capital gains tax hike will destroy their life's work. Hey, they can save it all by canceling their Disney Plus. But before this minister runs away from the mic again, does she think her attack on small businesses is actually fair?
The Honourable
Such a-
Deputy
such a
Prime Minister
crock.
and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, for the past 8 weeks, the Conservatives have been dithering and delaying and deflecting. They were squirming. They were so uncomfortable.
No, they haven't been. They've been quite clear about this
they
in the
had to
beginning,
make
actually.
A really big choice. Were they actually going to be on the side of working people, Canadians who live paycheck to paycheck, or on the side of multimillionaires? Well, today, we know whose side they're on. We are voting for fairness. The Conservatives are voting against it, as we always knew they would.
The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Her and the leader of the NDP can do as many photo ops with their bikes as they want, but these champagne socialists are taking money from the middle class to give to rich liberal insiders, their elitist Bay Street buddies, and the bloated bureaucracy. This job-killing tax hike vilifies success, punishing small businesses and their workers. That's why GDP per person in Canada is collapsing and Canadians are poor. Before she spends another $1 billion next week to service her debt, can she tell us, is this fair?
I ask all members on all sides of the House to please to not express yourselves unless you're recognized by the Speaker. It's for a whole bunch of reasons, but the very least of all, so that we can hear the question and hear the answer. The Honourable...
With no translation problems today, Greg?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read out a quote from a debate in the House of Commons. Quote, monstrous increases in capital gains are making the rich vastly richer and creating a kind of aristocratic feudal economy. You know who said that? The member for Carleton. He did, yeah. And today, he is leading his party in voting to make those gains even more monstrous, in voting in favor of that aristocratic feudal economy. Well, we vote for fairness. They vote against it.
Somebody just ran up to her with that. I'd like to see if there's a bogus headline or not.
Order, please.
But if it is, if that's what he said, he was wrong when he said it. I mean, the guy said probably said a lot of stupid things in the past. All MPs have. So
ask members to the right.
the really stupid thing is for the government to think it should be able to take away your investment when it's getting all of taxpayer money funding their pensions, their salary, and their benefits.
To modernize its aid to independent cinema program. Modernizing should mean improving.
And I have worked on the Hill. I know how much these swine are getting.
To access the NFB's editing
and they're constantly bitching
funded by public
about anybody who has to work for a living and has to make their own money.
Compliance with its editorial line.
Because half of these people in this House of Commons couldn't get a real job.
Propaganda. Will the minister allow this to happen?
But now they'll get lots of real jobs because they peddle their influence when they leave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question. I'm aware that currently the NFB is looking at its program to support independent producers. They have a clear mandate to support independent producers in all their diversity, including French. I will ensure that they continue to respect their mandate, and I invite producers to share their concerns with the NFB management. They are independent, and they will make decisions accordingly. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Pierre Perrault, Norman McLaren, Léa Poole, Micheline Lacteau, Denis Arcand, Pierre Falardeau, Denis Villeneuve. All these Quebec filmmakers have benefited from the NFB, a veritable laboratory for independent
he gets so sick of listening to the Bloc whining when they don't even want to be part of the country. They just stand up and whine. They think they want their share of something when they don't even want to share in the country. They're such imbeciles.
To remind us, but we thought our cinema was too.
I would love to see the House clean of every last Bloc MP, every last blockhead. Because they're just wasting my time and theirs.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
I shouldn't say theirs because they're getting paid handsomely for being nothing but an impediment to the federal process.
We know how important it is for the next generation of cinema in Quebec and Canada. All of the names given by my colleague highlights how much talent and quality we have in Quebec and Canada. So we will continue to support them. And that's why we've increased just about all budgets in culture, because we know how important it is. And we've done that because we believe in our talent, in our culture, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Canada's Independent Cinema Assistance Program was working well. No one was complaining, but it lacked a little too much constraint for the NFB's taste. And that's how it is everywhere now with crown corporations. Letting artists be artists is no longer an option, it seems. They have to be told who to be, what to think, how to express themselves on
And
what
the Bloc
issues.
is
They have to
definitely
be
batting
molded, put into
1,000 for
boxes
stupidity
all the
today.
time. The case of the NFB
When the
is
blockhead leader
worrying,
gets
and
up
it's natural for
and
the
says
cultural
we've got to
sector
take
to
the religious
mobilize and
exemption
protest.
away from
Now,
hate
which
speech
side
so
is
we
the
can start
minister on?
imprisoning
Art
pastors,
or state
this is
propaganda?
it's exactly what I'm sure he's a moribund Roman Catholic
The
or
Honourable
an
Minister
atheist or
of
one or
Canadian
the other.
Heritage.
And this is a
Mr.
guy who wants
Speaker,
to start locking up pastors
I
for
thank
saying something
the
that is
producers of the
offensive,
coalition for their work, all those in
for
Quebec
quoting
who
the
stand up to
Bible.
ask
This is what this
institutions to
religious
support
exemption
them
is all
well.
about. The Bloc
And
is leading it
the government is
because the
listening. We've
Bloc
shown it
are
budget after budget since
completely
2015 by setting up
anti-religious
new
down to
supports,
the nth
especially with
degree.
telefilm. We support the NFB. We've added money to the Canadian Media Fund, all to ensure that we have diversity in content, that there's capacity for producers to contribute their talent to our screens, and to have Quebec and Canada shine around the world. We will continue to be there for our cultural industry, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, the average doctor is $300,000 in debt from medical school, and the Ontario Medical Association says the latest NDP Liberal tax grab will, and I quote, put further pressure on the viability and sustainability of a fragile system and could force existing physicians out of practice and dissuade new grads from practicing in Canada. Canadians are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. Why is the Minister of Finance making it harder for Canadians to find a family doctor?
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the critic for his first question in almost a year on the matter of the healthcare crisis in this country. I can tell him that it's extremely important that nurses and doctors and that everybody pay the same tax
Listen to
rate.
this
And we want to
snide
make
bastard.
sure that it's
Mr.
fair.
Euthanasia czar.
We've been making
So
critical
I'm sure you've been
investments,
keeping
Mr.
count.
Speaker, with every province and every territory, $200 billion. But in order to make those investments in our healthcare system, we need a fair and just tax system. That's why we're making sure we do that, Mr. Speaker, precisely so that we can make the investments and not have the cuts that we would see with the Conservatives.
The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, every week I speak to Canadians who do not have a family doctor. How is this fair? The elderly, Canadians with chronic diseases, Canadians with mental health struggles, kids with cancer, none of them can access the healthcare system. How is this fair? And the Canadian Medical Association says things are only going to get worse. They say this tax will jeopardize efforts to recruit and retain doctors. As physicians leave this country en masse, how many Canadians will go without health care due to this NDP Liberal tax grab?
It's outrageous.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, a fair and just tax system won't threaten our healthcare system. What will threaten our healthcare system is eliminating dental care for seniors, is eliminating pharmacare, is cutting into healthcare. And that's exactly what we've seen from the Conservatives. We were able to make over the next 10 years, $200 billion worth of investments with provinces and territories. Those are put at direct risk and jeopardy because of Conservative cuts. And I find it interesting that the only time they've ever asked healthcare questions in this House is when we started talking about fairness and making sure that everybody pays their fair share.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, over 2.3 million people don't have a family doctor in Quebec. Serge Gagné, a retiree, told Le Journal de Montréal, I was told, you shouldn't be here, you don't have a family doctor. The Canadian Medical Association is clear. In the midst of a doctor shortage, these changes could jeopardize efforts across Canada to recruit and retain quality healthcare professionals. How many families, mothers, and seniors will be deprived of a doctor by this Prime Minister because they will have chosen to practice elsewhere? How is this fair for Mr. Gagné? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, the Conservative Party is asking questions about our healthcare system.
I don't think it's
so
the first
interesting
time
to
at all.
me, because what is threatening our healthcare system is not a fair and equitable system. It's Conservative cuts. They want to cut investments, major investments to dental care, to pharmacare, and agreements with each province and territory. We must continue to invest in our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, Quebec farmers are crying out for help. Instead of hearing their cry, the Prime Minister has chosen to hike taxes on them. He ignored their representatives who said categorically by increasing the capital gains inclusion rate to 2/3, we're jeopardizing the success of intergenerational farm transfers to young farmers across Canada. The Prime Minister is jeopardizing the future of regional agriculture. How is this fair to future generations of farmers? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, as the daughter of a farmer, I understand the situation of our farmers, and we increased the cumulative exemption for farmers. But I'd also like to point out that Quebec has a choice. The Quebec Finance Minister decided to follow the federal example with capital gains because Quebec needs revenues, for example, for healthcare. The Honourable Member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Jean-René Patry is 80 years old. He's worked his whole life and still is, but he's getting tired. He works, but he has to live in his van. With his pension and odd jobs, he can't afford an apartment in Montreal, all because the Liberals and Conservatives left housing to speculators. Mr. Patry knows exactly what's needed, social housing ASAP. There are thousands of people like him who can't find housing. What does the Minister of Housing have to say to all the Mr. Patrys out there in Quebec and Canada? The Honourable the Honourable Minister. What I would say to Mr. Patry is that today is a historic day because today we're putting in place tax measures that will precisely provide for fairness, which will allow us to invest in housing and pharmacare. Today, and I hope the NDP will support us, we're making sure we're asking multimillionaires to do a little bit more to help people like Mr. Patry.
These are all multimillionaires with these properties. These people are just so incredibly hypocritical and delusional.
Canadians with disabilities cannot afford bare necessities. They can't keep up with groceries, housing, or their medication costs. The Liberals promised that their new Canada Disability Benefit would lift Canadians with disabilities out of poverty. It won't. $200 doesn't even scratch the surface of an adequate income. Will the finance minister admit they've messed up the rollout of this benefit, listen to the community feedback, and fix their botched mess?
Yeah. There's a botched mess. You contributed to it, obviously.
Diversity, inclusion, and people with disabilities.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais...
There's a minister of that?
I'd like to thank the member opposite.
Oh, it's a parliamentary secretary to a minister of that.
Benefit. We are the government that has funded this benefit to the highest tune within this budget to the tune of $6 billion. There will be 600,000 Canadians who will be supported through this benefit. This is a critical moment for Canadians, for our government, for all of us working together. I want to thank all advocates who have been advocating for this and working for this. We are building a fairer and more inclusive Canada. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah, sure you are. You're building a poorer Canada.
Member from Mississauga, Malton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian families know that this government will be there to support them when they need it most. Government programs such as $10 a day childcare and a pharmacare system that helps pay for contraceptives have allowed a record number of women to enter the workforce. This is huge for Canadian families and the economy. Can the Minister of Families notify this House how we will continue to advance this progress and further enhance
Look at this
generational
softball question.
fairness?
Oh yeah, free contraceptives. That means women can go to work. How come I couldn't? How come it didn't stop them in the
Mr.
past?
Speaker, on this side of the House,
Well, these
we are
people are-
proud of the programs that we have put in place to help
Oh,
Canadian
it's
families
Jana
get ahead.
Suds.
Generational fairness
I'll have a scotch and
means
soda,
asking
or
the
make
most
that a beer.
fortunate Canadians to pay a little bit more. It means ensuring that
little
our
bit more.
tax system is fair. Today, Conservatives have made it clear they are not in favor of fairness. They would rather cancel $10 a day childcare, cancel our national school food program, cancel dental care for those who need it. Really, Mr. Speaker, this is definitely not fair for Canadians.
Okay. Frozen Canadian Jenna Studs will be coming around with your next beer.
The honourable member for Foothills.
The Liberals' increase in the capital gains inclusion rate from 50 to 60% is a direct attack on Canadian farm families. The Liberals like to claim that this will only impact the ultra-rich, but that just isn't true. This will impact family farms and young farmers who are just trying to take over the family farm. And the average grain farm will easily exceed the lifetime exemption rate. This tax increase isn't fair and will jeopardize the economic viability of farm families and our rural communities. Will the Prime Minister end his attack on family farms who are just trying to put food on our table?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question, but it's important to note that when he and his government were in power, they slashed $500 million at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. They slashed $200 million out of the business risk management
Okay,
program.
Lawrence is having
And
trouble
of course,
holding that paper
the question I
today.
have is how much more would you slash?
This is Joe.
if
This
you
is
ever
Joe
got the
Biden's
chance to
other brother.
slash? But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that we have reinstated the fund into Agriculture.
Well, this is the uncle that didn't get
Canada,
devoured by
and
cannibals.
we have reinstated the fund into the business risk management program. We have and will continue to support farmers in this country, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, you're really supporting farmers, all right. Decrepit hypocrite.
Of course, questions should be put through me. That's the best way that it should be done. The honourable member from Foothills.
Well, it's still not reassuring that the Agriculture Minister still doesn't know that there's going to be a capital gains inclusion rate change that's going to impact Canadian farmers. Farmers who are trying to work hard every day to feed Canadians. And the only thing that this tax change is going to do is feed an obese Liberal government. They say this is about fairness, but it isn't fair to young farmers. When they buy the family operation, they are burdened with millions of dollars in debt. This is a gift to the ultra-rich who will buy up family farmland, making mega multinational industrial farms. Will the Prime Minister admit
This is
this is
excellent.
not a tax on the ultra-rich? This is an attack on the very survival of family farms.
That is exactly the point. That's who's getting penalized with this.
Over the past 9 years, this Conservative Party has a record. When they were asked to vote to lower taxes on the middle class, what did they say? No. When they were asked to approve a Canada Child Benefit, what did they say? No. When they were asked to vote on child care, on pharmacare, on dental care, what did they say? They said no. Why is it when Canadians look to this Conservative Party to stand up for them, they take a seat?
Like to remind all members on the government side, as well as all members generally, that chanting is not permitted in the House. The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Lobstermen in Nova Scotia fish for our food, risking their lives in the winter. Waves crashing over them, fishing in blizzards and high seas. They risk their lives for 40 years so they can save a little to retire on the sale of their boat and their license. The NDP Liberal latest tax grab on fishermen is to increase massively the tax on the sale of their license, boat, and gear, even after the fishing exemption. So why do the NDP Liberals think that robbing fishermen of a dignified and honest retirement is fair?
Yeah. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, today is an important day for Canadians because today, after taking 8 weeks of truly undignified dithering and deflecting, the Conservatives have finally shown their true colors. And
What
now
is she
they really
talking
stand for.
about?
They had a chance to stand with the plumbers, with the welders, with the nurses, with
What
the
a-
teachers. But they've decided that multimillionaires should pay lower taxes than working Canadians. That's just
The Honourable
And it's
member
all
from
capital
South
gains.
Shore,
It's all about
St.
the capital
Margaret's.
gains. There's no other.
Liberal Minister is doing is
Oh,
bringing
God,
in
she's
retirement
incredibly
killing
stupid woman.
taxes on fishermen. Mrs. J and her husband from Nova Scotia worked for 50 years to build their lobster and fish buying business. They sold their business to create their modest retirement income by investing that proceeds and creating a humble retirement. They paid their fair share of taxes already, but Liberals want to take more of the retirement income. Why does this Prime Minister think that robbing an 85-year-old widow of her hard-earned, dignified retirement income is fair?
Exactly.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Speaker, we have already today, at last, established that the Conservatives are against fairness, that they are against a nurse or a welfare paying tax at a fair rate. They want a
Incredible story. What they are is good storytellers. And there's nothing real about what they say.
They're saying they're going to
They just read the script. And this is just like watching a movie.
That is providing care for people in Atlantic Canada. They're going to cut the early learning and child care. They're going to cut pharmacare.
The honourable member for
I wish it was more than just
Berthier-Masquinongé.
water at this point.
Colleagues, the Honourable Member
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Harvests were terrible last year, partly because of natural disasters. Last week, farmers finally reached a deal with Quebec for compensation, and they're saying loud and clear it's Ottawa's turn now. Well, fresh produce growers are in town today. They met with the minister this morning to remind him that they exist and they deserve support. They've been demanding emergency federal assistance for almost a year now. When will the minister finally listen to them and trigger agri-recovery?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I
Getting up
appreciate
again
my
today?
colleague's question and concern, and he knows I am concerned too. And I did meet them and appreciate the work that you have done with the farmers. But he's well aware that agri-recovery is a joint effort between the Government of Canada and the provincial governments across the country. I can share that with the House that we have been working closely with the Government of Quebec and things are progressing well. I know the farmers need the money and we'll work as fast as we can, making sure we follow proper procedure to get the money in the hands of the farmers as quickly as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
How can you even take that doddering old fool seriously?
The Weather
Time
Channel is
to
forecasting
go
another
faster.
high-risk summer for natural disasters. And the federal government has still done nothing to compensate
Oh,
for
here
last year's.
we go. Climate
As a result,
change
we're off to
again.
a pretty bad start. 1 in 5 farms is unable to pay their debts. 1 in 10 farms is at risk of going out of business within a year, Mr. Speaker. So emergency help is urgently needed. Producers have been calling on Ottawa for almost a year. Quebec has been asking Ottawa to act for 7 months. Will the minister finally trigger agri-recovery? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, again, I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern. I'm fully aware that the farmers need the funding as quickly as possible. There is a procedure to follow. I think my honourable colleague is well aware that we're following that procedure with the Quebec government. And as soon as I possibly can,
As soon as you
it's
possibly
approved,
can.
I will make sure the money is in the hands of the farmers that's much needed as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake.
Just stop taking our money away.
During
in
a
taxes.
housing crisis, the Liberal finance minister is making things worse. The new capital gains tax will kill investments in Canada and drive up the cost for those who provide housing. Rental experts are saying the consequences of this tax hike would be disastrous in the short, medium, and long term, citing concerns for viability of long-term investment. This will lead to less places to rent and more costs to renters. Canadians are already facing the highest average asking rent ever. So how is it fair that the Liberals are putting the brakes on new housing when Canadians can barely afford to rent?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, let's remember that this member is from a party whose leader got 7 affordable units built when he
Oh, now
was
it's
in
7.
charge of housing.
Remember, it was 6
Let's
for the longest time.
their
Now it's 7.
housing plan would actually put more tax on home builders. And let's remember that this is the party that believes in cuts, cuts, cuts. They're
No,
gonna
believes
cut
in
dental care,
individual,
they're gonna cut
individual,
pharmacare,
individual,
they're
not
gonna cut
state,
early learning
state,
and child-
state.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
That member has lost all credibility with Canadians, and a job-killing tax on healthcare, homes, farms, and small businesses is the last thing that Canadians need right now in a cost of living crisis. This new tax won't build any homes. It will only discourage investment of purpose-built rentals. Richard Lyle, residential construction expert, said there's not a chance the Liberals will meet their own housing targets. Housing starts are down, and this tax hike will only make it worse. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. How is it fair that the Liberals are raising taxes when home building starts are down?
Earl Craft, I'm writing a column about that actually for the Post-Millennials. So it's interesting that this would come up today.
She talks about credibility. She was in the House of Commons committee meeting responsible for housing when an expert from the rental sector told her that her party's position on not waiving GST for the building of purpose-built rentals was deeply irresponsible. That's a direct quote, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, she voted against her community of Kelowna getting almost $32 million to incent zoning changes that will lead to the building of 20,000 homes over the next 10 years. That's the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. They identify problems, but they never offer solutions.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, rents are getting higher and higher, and affordable housing is becoming scarcer and scarcer. Canadians are distressed by this housing crisis, and now the Prime Minister wants to make things worse by changing capital gains tax. According to the Quebec Corporation of Landlords, this change will push rents higher, which is definitely to be avoided in the current context. Why does the Prime Minister want to raise taxes on housing in the midst of a housing crisis? How is that possible, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, I have good news for my colleague opposite. According to Stats Can, in April, there was a record high number of housing permits, of construction permits in 1 month. 22,600. That's a lot more than 6, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, here on this side of the House, we know that countries with huge inequalities between rich and poor do not fare well. With childcare, the Canada Child Benefit, dental care, affordable housing, among other things, we are there to support those in need. In Canada, we're building a fairer tax system for all generations. Can the minister tell us what our government is doing to strengthen our social safety net for the benefit of all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense that a nurse has a higher tax rate than a multimillionaire, but that is the reality right now. We have a duty to ensure tax fairness. By increasing the capital gains tax, we'll be able to build more housing, cover more pharmacare, and strengthen our social safety net. It's clear that the other side has chosen a different camp, the camp of multimillionaires. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals will do anything to look like they're on the side of the middle class. But people aren't fooled after 9 years of inane policies that have deepened inequalities. Now they're going after the dead and the bereaved with the capital gains tax. We're talking about a tax hike on inheritance. Are the Liberals so desperate to make political gains that they're willing to go after the dead and bereaved?
Going after the dead or bereaved.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, today is an important day for Canadians because today every member has to make a choice. Each of us has to decide whether we're in favor of fairness. If we think a nurse
I have to
should
laugh at the
pay
phony
less
drama
tax
they
than a
inject into this.
multimillionaire,
Like this
for
is a
us,
major choice of a
our
lifetime
party,
to vote for another liberal
we
tax or not.
have made that choice. But now Canadians can see what the Conservatives think. They're against fairness and in favor of multimillionaires.
There's going to be a major election coming up, and they're going to boot your ass out of here. And that would be a happy
Mr.
day for
Speaker,
everybody.
We've made our choice, and our choice is to think of seniors who are trying to leave an inheritance to their children. But these liberal tax measures will be such that taxes will gobble up their inheritance. Can the Minister of Finance explain why people's inheritances will be gobbled up by the Liberal government?
Then I have
the Honourable Government House Leader. In 9 years in this House, and I would even say
A sudden adult
in the 20
truth.
years
You're
since
dead
the
on. This is
leader
that's
of the
exactly what I
opposition has
said
had a seat
when there
in
were
this
no
House.
questions
Conservatives have voted
about the spy
They
scandal.
voted
This is
against
another
tax
distraction.
cuts for the middle class, against the Canada Child Benefit, against every time, against childcare subsidies, against dental care, against pharmacare. Every time Canadians ask the Conservatives to stand up for them, they stay in their seats, Mr. Speaker.
the honourable member from Simcoe North.
There you have it, Mr. Speaker. Farmers, fishers, families, physicians, all will be impacted by this tax. The government either didn't know this was the case or doesn't care, because had they actually taken the time to ask StatsCan, they might have found out that almost 50% of the people impacted by this tax otherwise make less than $100,000 a year. So why does this government continue to insist on purposely misleading Canadians about
Now
who
that
will
is
be
the,
impacted
it's
by
the
this
first guy
job-killing
who's actually
tax?
put a number to this. $100,000. That's almost the poverty line
The
now.
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Ridiculous.
Mr. Speaker, the only party trying to mislead Canadians is the Conservatives.
It's the
They have
Conservatives.
been trying to pose as the party of the little guy. But today, they've had to make a choice. It was a hard
Oh,
choice
shut
for
up.
them.
Stop repeating the same stupid lines that are meaningless.
Struggle. But at the
You're
end
a
of the
pathetic
day, the
individual.
Conservatives made the choice they always make. They're voting against fairness. They're voting in favor of austerity. They're voting in favor of their rich lobbyist friends. That's what
The honourable member from Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many young people in my riding of Don Valley East are worried about not being able to find a place to call their home. They see housing being used more
Well,
and
then,
more as a
bloody
way
well,
to make
stop
money,
voting for you
and it's
then.
hurting their possibility of home ownership. Can the Minister of Public Service and Procurement tell this House what is the government's plan to make housing more affordable and to help build a fairer future for all young Canadians?
Don Valley East.
The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike Conservatives who've been treating home ownership as a casino, we put in place a foreign buyer's ban so that foreign speculators no longer price out hard-working Canadian families. Unlike the Conservatives, we're working with MPs in the GTA area to use public lands for affordable homes and not for the profits of the highest bidders. And our plan for tax fairness is asking wealthier Canadians to pay a little bit more so we can build more homes faster. Now, will the leader of the opposition support that plan for housing fairness and tax fairness? Probably not.
The honourable member from Timmins, James Bay.
For decades, the Mushkegowuk Cree of James Bay have fought to end substandard health and to get a proper hospital built. But now that the deadline is looming for the future of the Winnebago Hospital, the federal government has walked away. If they don't return to the table with funding, the construction companies will quit and provincial funding will evaporate. And all these years of hard work will be lost. The communities and the NDP have called on the Prime Minister to intervene. It's now
This
or never.
bloody
So
mad
is the minister
professor has
willing
got
to commit
nothing
today
but
to flow the funds so this hospital in James
idiocy to
Bay can
offer here.
finally be
This
built?
is the question, Herc 101. What
The
about
Honourable
the
Minister for
name?
Indigenous Services.
Every Canadian in
Is
this
that no
country
longer of
deserves
interest
access
to
to
these
healthcare,
people?
and that's why we're working so closely with the hospital,
They don't.
with
Nobody
Ontario,
wants to
to make
talk
sure
about it
that
today.
residents in the Moosonee area can actually access
And you
healthcare, just
know,
like every other person in
we've
Ontario.
only got
Mr. Speaker, I met with the board yesterday. I met with
week and a half
Fiddler,
left.
and the Prime Minister has
A
also
question
written a letter
period?
confirming our commitment to this project.
If this dies with the summer recess,
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are
it
jeopardizing
will
affordable
demonstrate
childcare
that
by
this country
refusing
is a
fair
banana
pay and benefits
republic.
for childcare workers. In Alberta, experts say childcare workers earn less than a livable wage, driving many away from the sector. But this is an issue across Canada, as low pay and benefits are common for childcare workers, most of whom are Indigenous and women of color. When will the Liberals get serious about affordable quality childcare and create a national workforce strategy for childcare workers that actually works?
The Honourable Minister for Families and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the question and for her advocacy. I know she cares
There's Miss
deeply
Boo. No, it's
about
Jenna
early
again.
childhood education.
Oh.
I'm happy to share
One
back
more
in
round.
response to her question that we are working with the provinces and territories on a national strategy for the workforce. I look forward to moving that forward. There's a lot of work to be done as we work to create 250,000 new spaces, and the early childhood workers are at the heart of that strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that brings to the end of question period, but I know all members will be particularly interested in this recognition. This year, Canadians are commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day, giving us the opportunity to recognize the sacrifices that the men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces have made and continue to make on our behalf. Pour les citoyens de toutes les régions du pays.
Canadians across the country, it's for them that I wish to underscore the sacrifices made by members of the Canadian Armed Forces, sacrifices that they have made and continue to make for us.
Centennial of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Accordingly, I wish to draw to the attention of members in the presence of the gallery of members of the Royal Canadian Air Force, including Lieutenant General Eric Kenny, Commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and Lorena McKinnon, who is departing after 10 years of serving as its honorary colonel.
No, I just kept it on for there because I'm ex-Air Force. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today at Stand on Guard. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I'm serious. I do enjoy commenting on it. It can be frustrating at times. It can be like going to the dentist at times, but part of the process. So what did I say at the beginning? Hope we hear some questions about those MPs who were spies. Not a single question. It's like it disappeared. Not going to talk about it. Anyway, if you're watching Redacted today, I will be on talking about the spying and about Trudeau's delusion. So I encourage you to... thank you, Herc 101, for 27.99. Thank you very 27.99. Thank you. It is much appreciated. And your support is much appreciated. And your liking the station is much appreciated. Your subscriptions are much appreciated. If you need to resubscribe, do so. I'll be back again tomorrow. You know that. And yes, hit the like, hit the like button. And we're going to beat the censorship, whether it's Trudeau or whether it's YouTube. But thank you. Couldn't do it without your support. And we're going to keep on fighting, and let's resolve to resist. Bye for now.